Congregation of Holy Cross is a relatively new religious community in the history of the church. Considering the 2,000 years since the birth of Jesus, our community was founded about 180 years ago, immediately after the French Revolution.
In the words of Charles Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The best of times in that some relief and hope was given to people at the time of the French Revolution. The worst of times in that traditions, religious practices, even hope were all dissolved in the furor of the Reign of Terror. Churches were abandoned and left to ruin. School buildings were inhabited by farm animals and rodents and rats seeking a new home. Religious education, apart from a few institutions of higher learning, was left desolate and ignored. People were hurting, longing for solace, support, and ministry.
Up until that period, the Western world really viewed the meaning of life through the lens of Christian faith. We saw everything through the gospel teachings of Jesus, through the various dogmas of the church throughout the ages. After the French Revolution, reason replaced faith as the lens through which we would discover and think about the meaning of life. Reason and technology and the discoveries of science began to look at life as what would be measurable in the material world, in the empirical world. And more truth was seen through that lens of reason, through that lens of technology, through that lens of science. Humanism began to take over as the philosophy of life. It replaced our faith as the way that we would interpret life's meaning.
But a few did care and struggled to correct this great loss. Groups of teachers, medical assistants, leaders, and organizers began to unite for the strength and hope found in their association. Some schools were opened, some churches restored, and care was given to the sick and helpless. Among these leaders and teachers were two French priests, Father Jacques Dujarrier and Father Basil Moreau, both of whom had separately formed groups of young men and women to be trained and then teach in the schools, and young men to be ordained priests and assist in the priestless parishes of France.
When Father Moreau founded the Congregation of Holy Cross, he chose the motto, "The Cross, Our Only Hope," as the focus of our spirituality. He wanted us to bring hope into a world that was so downcast through its suffering, whether it be the suffering of illness, the suffering of unemployment, the suffering of a lack of food or water, the suffering of justice, the suffering of indifference.
Advancing age and persistent sickness left Dujarrier weak and increasingly unable to offer the guidance needed for his young men who were called brothers. And so he eventually gratefully committed his brothers to the care and guidance of Basil Moreau. These priests and brothers would be called the Congregation of Holy Cross. Inclusion of the Holy Cross Sisters a few years later completed Moreau's dream of a community of Josephites, Salvatorists, and Marianites of Holy Cross.
He wanted the sisters and the brothers and priests of Holy Cross to model the Holy Family of Nazareth. In doing that, he expected that we would be able to express our vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience as a family, as a body of Christ living in our world today.
A small and simple beginning, now only a budding blossom of hope and faith to do God's work. But that blossom was to expand, develop, increase in size, scope, and undertakings. There would soon come opportunities to work in schools and parishes and hospitals, not only in France itself, but in Africa, in the United States, in Canada, Asia, and Latin America. Such an enthusiastic call to ministry has turned simple chapels into great churches and simple village schools into great colleges and universities. Today we take pride and offer thanksgiving to God that the work of Dujarrier and Moreau is still seen to be growing and flourishing, whether we stand on the bluffs overlooking Portland or over the Great Rift Valley. From the streets of Dhaka to the Garo Highlands, from Lima to the Altiplano, from Monterey to Montreal. Wherever Holy Cross is, we take pride in our efforts to continue to initiate new avenues of service and education. It is fundamental in the tradition of the Congregation of Holy Cross. But the work of teaching is more than work in schools or laboratories. There is also the search of wisdom, what values we shall live by that can enhance our life experiences.
Jesus taught us that we have to sacrifice ourselves for one another. And in that sacrifice, we will find the joy of life. And that is really at the heart of Father Moreau's teaching for Holy Cross. Father Moreau believed in the age of enlightenment, but he also believed in the age of faith. And the faith was in God's love.
This is not classroom work, but rather work rooted in experience and example and prayer. Living in union with close friends and religious community offers an opportunity to learn of life guided by principle, enriched by understanding, nourished by the example of fellow workers.
When Father Moreau spoke of evangelical vows, poverty, chastity, and obedience, the vows that every religious takes, he wanted us to see those vows as really habits of life, the traits or characteristics that marked Jesus' life, that formed his personality. He wanted us to incorporate in our lives his poverty, Jesus' obedience, Jesus' own chastity. And in doing that, he hoped that we too would conform ourselves to Christ and be an image of Christ doing his work in the world. The great mission of Jesus was to teach, to heal, and of course to pray.
Here is the gentle place of our daily renewal, for finding forgiveness for occasional slips or mistakes, for discovering the welcome offered to us based on our union with each other, and not simply on success or reward for our efforts. As recipients of such healing kindness, we learn that we can always find hope and acceptance in our Congregation of Holy Cross.
Father Moreau wanted our congregation to be apostolic, so that we too could teach and heal and pray and bring salvation to our world.
This is the healing provided by our common life and shared values. But there is healing as well for discouragement, for rejection, for failure. The gift of healing given to us is but the stimulus to extend that same healing to all who are in need of it. The disappointed, the forgotten, the abandoned, and the lonely can find in us both sympathy and kind reception. The broken-hearted can weep in our presence and know that we share the heartache. The sick can be visited. The bereaved husband or wife can find someone to talk to, someone who will listen. We can rightly be proud that our congregation tries to provide this wonderful gift in parishes, workshops, retreats, and private personal encounters. The gift of forgiveness given to us is truly a gift only when we share it with those in similar need. Physical healing as well has been part of Holy Cross from our start. Victims of war and injustice have always and continue to be recipients of our care and concern. We are found as chaplains and pastoral ministers at bedsides and sick rooms, in hospice homes and around kitchen tables. Such gifts as these can be offered by anyone who is willing to enter into the needs and difficulties of other people.
Throughout the history of Holy Cross, we have had individual religious who have exemplified these ministries of Jesus of praying and teaching and healing within their own lives. For example, Brother Andre Bissett of Montreal. He is known as the Miracle Man of Montreal.
This seemingly simple man worked as a welcoming person at the door of the shrine. He would help visitors find the proper places they sought, make arrangements for them for prayer and consultation. Guests quickly discovered that Brother Andre would listen to people with understanding and sympathy. Through the intercession of St. Joseph, prayers for and with the sick and abandoned were at times answered in healings at which we can only be silent in wonderment and thanksgiving.
Another great personality in the history of Holy Cross is Father Patrick Peyton, a contemporary, had a great devotion to Mary, the Mother of God. And he asked us to pray the Rosary for the unity of the family.
The family that prays together, stays together, is more than a catchy slogan. It helps explain why a community value system based only on successful efforts does not last. For any effort in the Lord's service will be marred to some degree by disappointment at times, frustrations, disagreements, and the other difficulties caused by human beings working with and for each other.
Jesus emptied himself in order to serve us. We too in Holy Cross wish to empty ourselves so that we can serve others.
The charism, the mystique, and the achievements of Holy Cross are personified by the account of Father Moreau as a model for teaching, Brother Andre as a model for healing, and Father Peyton as a model for prayer. But nothing that any of these men accomplished would have been achieved if it had not been for their trust in the Lord's providence and guidance, and their realization of the need for support and help from the community to which they belonged. Through this community effort at prayer before the Lord, the signs of a dedicated and apostolic group would become manifest. Not only would the marks of Holy Cross be established in buildings, obvious achievements, or famous personnel, but a community of friends whose gift from and to each other crystallized their efforts and work into an example of Christian life. Holy Cross is an association of men and women with concern and care for each other, for understanding and patience, for the gift of forgiveness, both given and received, and above all, for respect and acceptance for every person. Like those who have gone before us, Holy Cross is challenged today to be a community of men and women who are called to teach, called to heal, and called to pray. The charism, the mystique, and the achievements of Holy Cross are personified by the accounts of Father Moreau as a model for teaching, Brother Andre as a model for healing, and Father Peyton as a model for prayer. But nothing that any of these men accomplished would have been achieved if it had not been for their trust in the Lord's providence and guidance, and their realization of the need for support and help from the community to which they belong.